All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Shikha Malaviya. I'm a South Asian poet and writer of Indian descent and have been a poetry mentor with AWP's Writer to Writer program since 2016. It's been such a privilege and pleasure to work with six poets, four of which are here today with me, to share insights on what the Writer to Writer program has meant to all of us. So before proceeding, I'd like to give a shout out to the AWP team behind Writer to Writer, who have been so supportive and open to ideas and feedback and facilitating all of this so seamlessly. Thank you to Diane Zinna, who was there earlier, Kenny Lakes, Kathy Ridenour, Miranda Gonzalez, and to others who have made the Writer to Writer experience such a joyful one. So, all right, so welcome, Manisha, Preeti, Sunita, Mohammed. If you could briefly introduce yourselves for our audience and tell us where you all are speaking from.
Hi, my name is Manisha Sharma, and I am a writer and a communication specialist with the Student Innovation Center at Iowa State University. And I am speaking from Ames, Iowa, in the Midwest.
I'm Sunita Theiss. I'm based in Georgia, and I am a freelance writer and marketer. And I don't remember what the other question was, but I was one of the mentees with Shikha in the fall recently.
Awesome. Yeah, just like, brief introduction. All right, and Preeti.
Hi, I'm Preeti Parikh. I'm a poet and essayist, a freelancer. I'm joining you all from Cincinnati, Ohio.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mohammed Salimi, and I'm a Pakistani American writer. And I worked with Shikha in 2016, and currently I'm doing my thesis, MFA thesis on poetry from Boston University. And I'm broadcasting live from Sunnyvale, California.
Awesome. So it's so wonderful to see all of you together, and all of us are in different parts of the country and many of us have traveled back and forth. So it's just wonderful to see all of you here together. And I just want to say, you may have all been my mentees, but you also all are my friends and colleagues. So I think it's really awesome that we can come here together and have a conversation about poetry, community, and mentorship. So I was thinking, let's just dive into the questions. So the questions are very simple ones, but I think it's the answers we really want to hear from all of you. So, all right. My first question is that every writer's journey is unique. And if each of you could tell us briefly what brought you into poetry and then subsequently the Writer to Writer mentorship program, what were your hopes and expectations? What compelled you to want to do this? So let's see, shall I go by the order of the mentees that I had? Manisha, maybe you can start answering that question first.
So I got an MFA in fiction, and I did take some classes in poetry in the form and function of poetry, as well as like workshops. But yet I wasn't that confident in calling myself a poet. So right around the time when I got accepted for the Writer to Writer program, I had been dabbling my hands at some poetry, and I had a chunk of poems with me. So when the Writer to Writer applications opened up, and I think I had applied once before because this was the second time it was happening when I applied in spring 2016. So I submitted a portfolio of poems, and the best thing, something that gave me confidence, was that it was a blind contest kind of a thing. So you sort of feel like you will not be judged based on what your credibility or where you published and stuff like that. And so I submitted a bunch of poems, and I got selected. So that's how it started for me, like what brought me to poetry, because the subject that I was working with was more akin to being in poems, versus prose. And that is why I got into writing poetry in the first place.
Awesome. And yeah, that really resonated with me when I read your application about, how you got into poetry and, you were trying to do something very powerful and very complex in terms of the subject matter and trying to document things. So more like documentary poetry. So it really drew me in. And that's wonderful. And later on, we'll be hearing, of course, how all of you have taken the work you did at that time and how you progressed with it. But so I think after Manisha, it was Mohammed, right, that I worked with. So Mohammed, maybe you can tell us a little bit of what brought you to the program.
So what happened, it wasn't so. There was a lot of back and forth in my life. Like I've been moving across continents several times. So in 2000, I came to the U.S. after 17 years in Pakistan, and it was in 2016. And I came to write. Consider myself fairly young when it comes to writing. I did not write before that, but coming to San Francisco, a very tech area, and there was a lot of going around. And just to process that, that's when I, came towards poetry. And during that time, what I was doing was, working at a bank job, which is totally not related to poetry, doing some commission sales, came to know about the pyramid scheme. So a lot was happening around that time. And I started and I was like, you know what? It's not every time. I was like, it was like I was an adult, but a child as well. The excitement was of a child, but I had difficulties of an adult fixing in a new country. So just to process that, I was thinking, it's not every day you get to move to another country and you feel new and you're excited about it for good or bad reasons. So I was like, I had to document this. And that's when I, started writing poetry, which I at that time, I was like, oh, this is poetry. I did not know what poetry was. So, and it was during that time, I came to know about the AWP, looked it up, a lot of Google stuff and Googling, okay, how can I become a better writer? Any workshops? Because I wasn't getting into a program. So that's when I applied to AWP, and I'm still thankful. And that's where I met Shikha ji, and it has been amazing. And you can see I'm doing my MFA right now. So yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I mean, it was so wonderful working with you, and you talking about going back and forth, between continents and stuff. That was really reflective in your writing, because a lot of your poems were filled with nostalgia about the streets of Lahore and things like that, right? So
Yeah.
it was really neat to work with other writers who are writing about that same type of nostalgia that I had written about, and to resonate with it, because a lot of when I was doing things like that, I couldn't find others who were doing things like that. So it was really nice to be able to share that space with you. And let's see, then and I found that similarly in everybody else's work that I've worked with as well. So thank you, Mohammed. And next, I think is Preeti, right?
That's right. I was with you in fall of 2017. So I came to poetry relatively late. So growing up in India, I was always an avid reader, and I actually began writing poems and what I would call essayistic prose in my early teens, but it was always a very private endeavor, and my college education was all science related. So I didn't study literature or poetry formally, but I always kept feeling a calling to the page, like to delve deeper into creative writing. I moved to the US in 2003, and after quite a few false starts and almost a decade that I devoted to parenthood, in 2014, I decided that I was going to seriously put in efforts towards establishing a writing practice for myself. And I began exploring options for in-person and online classes and workshops. And just as like a relative newcomer, I attended the AWP conference in 2016, and that's where I learned about the Writer to Writer program at their booth in the book fair. And the following year, I decided I was going to apply. And at that time, my motivation was my desire to continue improving my craft. I was continuing to do all the other things that I had been doing, attending conferences, taking workshops, but I wanted to gain more awareness about what the contemporary poetry world is like. And more than anything, I wanted to feel a sense of community, because by that point, I felt that I was ready for a sustained engagement with a mentor or to be in a writing program. So that's how I ended up in the Writer to Writer program.
Thanks, Preeti. I remember reading your poems, and you also were writing about home, and you grew up in India, and you have a medical background, right? So it was really interesting to see how you brought those elements together, and then trying to find community here, which actually all of you in your applications mentioned. Right. And so it's, and that's also one of the reasons why I joined this program, because even, 20 years before, when I was studying creative writing, my biggest struggle was trying to find community. So when I read when I read the applications of everybody and the poetry of everybody, I'm like, this is community. This is one way of finding community. This is one way of creating community. And thank you for sharing how you came into this. So Sunita, it's really interesting. We met at AWP.
Yes.
And then she'd applied for the program, and I was so surprised to see her application. So why don't you share how that happened?
Yeah. So I thought that was one of the coolest things, that I'd actually gotten to meet you in person beforehand. And so I was working at a really interesting job. I was a copywriter, but the director of our team really valued sort of creative waste for professional development. And so we all had to take a little bit of time every month and write something that wasn't relevant to what we were doing. And so I was like, well, I wrote poetry in like high school, so I guess I'll try my hand at writing poems. And so I started writing poetry, and that went on for a couple of years. And then I heard about AWP, and so a bunch of people I knew in Atlanta who were writers were going. And so we went, and so much of the programming, I guess it was early last year, was there was a lot of things about South Asian writers and South Asian community. And I was just like, I need to soak all of this up right now. And so I attended a panel that you were speaking on, and then I got your business card. We emailed a few times, and then I applied for the program, and I specifically said, I'd love to connect with someone who is South Asian or Asian who has navigated this as a mom of a young child. And then there we were. And so that's, it was really beautiful that I'd met you before. We'd had some conversations about figuring this journey out, and then we got to actually spend some dedicated time over 10 weeks. Really just, I think, helping me frame and think about the way that I write and the way that I tell stories.
Yeah, I think it is really unique that we've met first. And I remember you'd actually read a poem after one of the South Asian panels. And yeah. I think you mentioned Bollywood and Shah Rukh Khan and things like that, right? And
yeah, I think it was actually a poem about, I was referencing, I can't remember the movie, but it was Hum Kisi Se Kam Nahi. It's like one of my dad's favorite movies. And so it was a poem about my dad. And I can't remember. I think there was time at the end, so you just opened it up for people to go up and share. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Sure, I'll share. And
right. Yeah. It was really neat to hear you read. And then when I got the application, so they just send these blindly, right? I mean, they didn't know that I'd met you or you'd met me. And then they just send you 5 applications and say, hey, read these and see if they resonate with you, and then choose what you like. And then when I saw your application, I'm like, oh my God, this is Sunita. And I think it'd be awesome to work with her, because I already knew a little bit about you and what your interests are, and like the different topics. And I think many of us, or all of us, we mine from our own experiences of being an immigrant, and being of a different culture, being a person of color. So it was really nice to see that up front at first, and then see it on the page as well. So I'm so happy that in whatever ways you all have come to this program that you did, and that I was able to connect with all of you. And so I think we can go on to our next question, which is actually about what it actually is like to be part of the Writer to Writer program. So the Writer to Writer program is over a period of a season, or 10 weeks, I believe, and it's based on modules that one can draw from. So I think maybe it'd be nice to talk about the format. That did it help you, and what was the process like how we worked together, and other things that stood out for you. I know that I emphasized like revision a lot, and then we talked about poetic arcs or arcs in poetry and epiphanies, things like that. So yeah, let's start with Manisha. Go down.
Yeah, I mean, when I became a part of the program, it was fairly new. So yes, Shikha and I did draw on the modules, but then we also, in a parallel manner, like framed our own schedule consistent with my needs and things like those of that nature. But what worked specifically for me was it was a huge amount of confidence that I can call myself a poet as well and work on poetry. And then I already had a project that I was working on, so there was no dearth of raw material. There was consistency because we spoke with each other at least once a week, sometimes more, and for hours. I would like revise my poems and keep revising and read. It was like a microcosm of an MFA program which lasts over 3 years, but this was a capsule kind of a thing. So that worked really well, and I was excited that I was working with someone who knew about poetry and how things worked in poetry. Simple things that revision does for us. I think revision was my biggest takeaway, and that literally improved my work. The feedback was really useful, and finally, because I was in a community where I don't think there was even a single person who was like me, versus like someone living in Southern California. Someone living in California, you encounter a lot of people of color, but my community was totally different, which was good in a way that you put your work in front of people who know nothing about it, and that tells you a huge deal too. But at the same time, I also needed familiar eyes for my work. So that's what my mentorship provided me, and Shikha provided me, and she knew what I was talking about. So that was extremely helpful. Yeah.
Thanks, Manisha. Mohammed, so why don't you share with us what your experience has been like?
Sure. Yeah, just like Manisha said, so when we started off in 2016, it was a fairly new program, but what I really appreciated was the flexibility and how it was, we customized it to what I was looking forward to. And what I clearly remember was that the first thing I asked Shikha was, well, you have to be honest. So, don't say this works, it's okay, you can come the other way, or don't just, tell me if it works or it doesn't work. Because at that time, I was more focused on, okay, so if I want to pursue writing, yes, I would want to work on my application. I was looking forward to get into an MFA. And the second thing, which I clearly remember, was that, being from South Asia, we're bred on, just like Sunita said, on Bollywood, Punjabi sentimentality and all that stuff. So if so what I was struggling at that time was, converting that into an American experience or into English. And that came out as very, as the American way of saying, very corny. So I was like, how do I, how do I take care of that? And Shikha ji was in that, in that unique position. She understood where, I was coming from, and she also understood how to put that on a page to make it sound fresh to an American readership. So that was something that we really worked on, and it was only possible because the AWP Writer to Writer program gave us that space and that flexibility for us to flesh out my work more further.
Thanks. I mean, it feels really nice to hear how different ways of working together, how it helped all of you, and I'm really honored that I was able to play that part in all of your journeys. So but yeah, also about I want to say, when we were talking about things like that, there's so many cultural nuances which could be misconstrued as stereotype when they aren't. and handling that and turning that into poetry can be very, very challenging. And I think it's adding our specific experience to that really makes it so powerful. And that was one thing which I really enjoyed working on with you and with others as well. So but let's see, I guess Preeti, we can hear from you now.
Yeah, I was quite taken by how intimate and welcoming writer to writer seemed right from the process of filling out that application. Just the questions they asked, the input they wanted from us about the kind of experience we were looking for. I thought that was remarkable. And the structure of the modules, I found it to be quite useful as a guide map, although I will say that my mentorship with Shikha just evolved quite organically through emails and phone calls and just kind of a mutual sharing of work and all of the interests that we had based on our position in the world. And but the modules definitely, they provided like kind of a scaffolding for all of the conversations that we were having, and the conversations were very far ranging because we talked about poetry here in the US but also poetry in India, and Shikha had such a unique perspective on that, which I really appreciated. So in addition to working on my poems, we talked about our literary influences, and she gave me a lot of reading recommendations, and she was such a great listener to whatever I had to say. And we also talked about conferences and residencies, and I was toying around with the idea of applying to an MFA program. So Shikha was a great sounding board and source of guidance for me during that time. And another thing that I really appreciated was that since Shikha is a publisher, she was able to give insight, and she was willing to talk about all those aspects about the editorial and publishing side of poetry as well, which I hadn't really had access of that kind before. So it was all a great learning experience for me.
Oh, thanks, Preeti. Yeah, no, I think we all have like a connection between different communities. So I mean, and if we're part of the South Asian diaspora, and then there's a our diasporic community here, and then there's also a community from our countries of origin, and sometimes it's difficult to figure out like where do we belong, and do we belong to both? Are we, as they say, torchbearers of our culture or not? And these are things that we some of the things we discussed among so it wasn't just about poetry, but it also about representation in poetry, and what do our words represent besides our personal experience. So our conversations, like, we often got into tangents, and I mean, I think it's in those tangents that we were really able to enjoy ourselves and express ourselves, and it was a mutual exchange of ideas. And I really want to emphasize that mentorship isn't just about I am teaching and you are receiving. I mean, it's a two-way street, and I think we all have really learned a lot from each other. And Sunita's back. I think we had lost you for a second. So Sunita, if you could share with us about
Sure.
writer-to-writer experience.
I'm so sorry about that. I think, kind of like everyone has said, it evolved, I think, in a way that worked for both of us. I'm an out loud processor, and it was really nice to be able to talk through everything as it was happening. And as I was writing it, and I think just talking through my process of writing it, and Shikha asking questions would trigger another idea or something that would make it just so much better than it was before. And the other thing I really appreciated is that I'd been used to sharing in spaces where I needed to add a glossary, or I needed to italicize words, or I needed to specify things that weren't in English in some other way. And it was really nice to not have to do that. And to just be like, this is a poem I wrote, and there are some references to Bengali because my mom is Bengali, or something like a Bollywood song that my dad used to sing all the time. And and it just made sense, and it just connected. And I think that helped me, I think, in my confidence as a writer, and to know that like there are people out there who will read my work and it will resonate, even if it feels very niche or very specific in one way.
Right. And I think, that's something we all have struggled with, like, how much do we need to tell, or how much, I mean, people talk about show and tell in fiction, but I mean, that's very much there in poetry as well. And I think with the internet and how things have just evolved in terms of accessing information, do we really need to like explain ourselves so much, or do we just be who we are and not worry about, will somebody understand this or not? And I think it's really neat to be able to culturally, connect and, understand where the other person is coming from. It makes a big difference in our work. And that's something I wish I had when I was starting out in writing. But I'm so glad that, we are able to have, conversations like this and talk about this. And so, which brings me to my next question I'd like to ask all of you. That one of the cornerstones of the Writer to Writer program is in matching a mentor and mentee together. And in our case, it meant working with a mentor of color or similar cultural background. And I mentioned this earlier, that I was really moved by how all of you in your application talked about how challenging it was to find community. So, and I think you may have talked about this a little bit, but how does this make a difference in your journey as a poet? Like, what are the challenges one has with being a writer of color and finding mentorship?
Yeah, it was huge when I was in my MFA program, because being in remote rural South college campus itself is a huge challenge, and then being a person of color. So in my MFA program, other than 2 faculty and we were the only representation of color. So it was quite difficult sometimes, and me coming from an Indian background, so some of my iterations were in British English, and even small little things just did not make sense and ended up like informative rather than interesting and engaging, which is what I wanted my work to be. So that was huge. Like, unless a writer had a worldwide perspective, it's not easy for writers of color to chime in, and we owe like huge responsibility for the others, that we are expected to know more and understand everything, which I think is a great thing, comes with like bilingualism as well. We know we become masters of not just one kind of English, but like 2 types of Englishes, 3 types of Englishes, but everything takes time. So that was huge, and I never really found a consistent community of writers to exchange my work with or get feedback from, even after I graduated with my MFA program. So getting into the Writer to Writer program, and especially with another poet of color, Shikha was extremely helpful in that for the first time, like outside of the workshop situation, I had someone that I could run my work through, and not only like, Shikha responding to my work, but I could also ask her that, I know that I'm way below in the ladder than you are as a poet, but would you mind sharing some of your work, and that kind of a give and take. So that definitely like goes up to building confidence as a writer of color. So yeah, that worked really well for me.
Thanks. Mohammed, would you like to say something?
Sure. So, right now I'm doing my MFA at Boston University, and yes, there are people of color there, but the thing is, under the people of color, there are a lot of other ethnicities, and finding a South Asian writer who sort of understands you, who knows where you're coming from, it's really hard. And I was delighted when I found out, okay, so Shikha ji, who also shares a similar background to me, would be there to mentor my work and guide me through the process of writing, publishing, and application, all that process. So yes, it is hard, but at the same time, what I found was with Shikha ji, the references that she gave me, the writers she referenced and she pointed to, it's not just, there's a community of South Asian writers, but there were writers that, oh, you should read his work or her work. And, you are thinking on those lines, you read that work, be more inspired. And also, I think one of the other things that really helped me was that, coincidentally, she's also in the Bay Area. I was in the Bay Area, and I had the opportunity to meet her as well in some programs. I remember we met in San Francisco's public library, and over there, she introduced me to other writers over there. And that again, was just, if one thinks to think, okay, so it's just one small application of the Writers to Writers program, the ripple effect that it caused in my life, it is huge. And I'm in contact with the writers that, she told me. And at the same time, I think the greatest, takeaway from this entire program for me was being more confident in your work. Like Sunita said, it's a delight not to have a glossary list or italicizing words, and being confident in that. Make the reader do your work. Make the reader Google what you're writing about, because coming from a colonial background, reading T.S. Eliot or W.H. Auden, we Google all the time. Oh, what does this mean? Oh, why is Bristol Street so famous? And it was always Googling them. So to find out a mentor like Shikha ji, and then being confident in your work and making the other people read about your work and research on it. So that was amazing.
Thank you. That's so true. And that, I think part of that is giving yourself permission to say, I am a poet. This is what I want to write about. I own these words, and having that confidence. And, it's amazing, just working with all of you, when I would see at the beginning, and then by the time we were done, just to see the shifts and changes in the work and in how you wanted to express yourselves. That was that's part of it, why I keep on coming back. I just love to see that. It's like a different kind of magic, So, okay, Preeti. Yeah.
Yeah, so when I started, writing seriously and involving myself in these online and local communities in 2015, I realized that I had this position as a writer where I grew up in India. So a lot of my writing centered on like the landscapes or the places or languages of that country. But then there were poems that were set here in the US as well. And it still is a learning process to learn how to craft this sort of mosaic identity and experience onto the page, and to be able to bring my specific position into my writing, but to do it in a way that it feels somehow true to my lived experiences, but then also avoiding sort of exoticizing any of it. So it's still a learning process for me as a writer of color, but I do have like a story about how, my serendipitous pairing with Shikha happened, because like I mentioned, when I first attended the AWP in 2016, there was an offsite event on the first day organized by Shikha's Press, the Great Indian Poetry Collective, and Kaya Press. I think it was called Lit and Color Write-a-thon. And I didn't know anybody, but I somehow said, I'm going to go to this event. And I think Shikha had presented there, but I don't think we had a chance to speak, but I picked up her book from the booth fair, Geography of Tongues, her book. And I remember feeling like an immediate connection to her writing. And so when I decided to apply the following year, it was such an incredible surprise to me to find out that I was paired with Shikha. And it was because it was up until that point in time, I hadn't really had that experience of working closely with anybody who shared so many aspects of my sort of intersectional identity. So she was so welcoming, and I felt quite accepted and seen, which maybe had not been my experience thus far in my explorations. So yeah, I mean, it's still a process. I'm still navigating my way through it. But I think having had this mentoring experience was a crucial turning point for me in the way I viewed myself as a writer.
Wow, I had completely forgotten, or I think you might have mentioned it to me, but I didn't realize the AWP connection here. And that is very serendipitous. And I think that is what's so wonderful, is that because our community is small enough that all of these connections that we do have or make turn out to be very serendipitous. And I hope it stays that way. And I hope we can all, be connected and be supportive of each other's work. I mean, how I met Sunita as well. I mean, that was also like, us working together. That was also very serendipitous. So, Sunita, would you like to share?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like I mentioned earlier. It's just it was kind of a breath of fresh air to just have someone read my work and go, oh, like I know what you're saying, and I don't mind, when people are willing and interested and engaged in learning, I don't mind sharing or explaining things, but I think it made me doubt the approachability of my work. And I think something I really aspire to in my writing is to be approachable, and for it to be something that resonates, even if you're not South Asian, or even if you're not a mom, or even if you aren't navigating grief in some way or another. And I think working with you and the opportunity to sort of look at my work and revise it, and I was like, oh no, what I'm writing does make sense, and what I'm saying is important, and I think, like everyone has said, it just did so much for my confidence, and and I've been in a season where I haven't had as much time to carve out the time to write, but when I do, I feel like I'm less resistant to myself, and I think my own process in doing it.
Right, right. Yeah, no, it's I mean, this is such a solitary field, and it's such a, I mean, poetry, a lot of it is like, it is a type of meditation. It is a type of rumination, and it can be a very lonely process too. I mean, solitary, lonely. I mean, they all, where's the line between the two, right? But so it is really nice to be able to know that we have, somebody who is there for us, and it's really nice that our mentorship blossomed into friendship, and Manisha and I, we keep on exchanging work or encouraging each other, and whenever I have conversations with like Preeti and others, it's really nice that we can just pick up from where we left off. And it's all of you after your mentorships have gone on to do such amazing things. So I was wondering if you all could like tell us about how are you able to build on your mentorship experience? Like, how has your writing life evolved since then? What are you working on? And what was your takeaway from all of this?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I have a short, crisp list of things that happened after my mentorship. The immediate thing was I finished a manuscript, revised it at the end of our mentorship period. And right after, I think within 6 months, I got accepted to a writer's residency at the Berman Studio Center, which was supported by a partial scholarship. And that those 3 weeks helped me like really dive deep into my work and organize the manuscript as a book, as well as like revise it. And after that, I've had like almost 24 poems published in nationally recognized journals as well. Recently, like in just 2021 itself, my book manuscript has been shortlisted for the Laureate Prize by Harbor Editions. Then section of the book manuscript was a finalist for the Iron Horse Chapbook contest. I won a contest by Fairfield University, was a semi-finalist for cultural review, it's a newspaper out of the Bay Area, Cultural Weekly. So lots and lots of things. And I mean, am no longer like an outsider to the poetry community in the United States. So I think that's like huge. And yeah, consistency is the most important thing is my takeaway. Like, nobody is a great poet or a worse poet or like anything. So just staying at it, having faith in the process and working through it. But none of it, I think, would have been possible had we not gone through those 6 weeks and that intense give and take um, of the writer to writer program. So I'm extremely, extremely grateful for this opportunity. Thank you so much, Shikha and AWP.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's amazing to hear all these things because I mean, we all talk, but and I hear bits and pieces, but it's nice to sort of hear all of this, collectively. So, Mohammed, tell us what you've been up to.
Yeah, so if I like sort of break down my poetic journey until my MFA, I consider it in like 5 steps. And these 5 steps are in the form of a workshop, or in this case was a mentorship program with Shikha. So for me, what was so this mentee to mentee program was my second step, and like I said, it gave me the confidence to believe in my work. It gave me the confidence to talk about my my background and my work, and that really really reflected in my work. And so far, I'm still careful about publishing my work. I think I'm just still one of those writers who is stuck in revisions. But if I come to see my work, like I'm still working on some poems which I worked with Shikha, and if I see them now, they've grown, and the range of metaphors, similes, the sounds, it has evolved into a beautiful beast in itself. And and I got published in the San Francisco Chronicle, which I was really thankful to Shikha for that. And right now I'm still working on my thesis, so which I do intend to publish into a book perhaps in a year or two. But I'm still holding on to my work that I worked on, and still enriching it with things that I've learned from Shikha through this program, and through and with all the communities that has grown around me, and it has been amazing. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. All the communities that have grown around me. That's so beautiful. Um, that's congratulations. Yeah, I can't wait to see the book when it's ready. So Preeti, tell us what you've been up to since our mentorship.
So my mentorship experience really crystallized my sort of resolution to enter into an MFA program, because I found a lot of clarity on my own readiness and a lot of confidence about being able to apply to the program. So I've been in low-res MFA program since 2018, and I will graduate in 2 weeks' time. So at the moment, I'm knee-deep in preparation for my upcoming graduation residency. I'm also revising my MFA thesis, which I hope will eventually become my first poetry collection. I've been publishing individual poems in some literary journals and anthologies, and I've also been paying a little bit more attention lately to being a good literary citizen of sorts, modeling what Shikha and the Writer to Writer program have done for us. So I'm a staff reader for the main review. I'm also a social media staff member for the 2021 Breadloaf Writers Conferences, which is online this year, and I'll be guest editing the poetry section for another Chicago magazine later in the fall this year. So that's where I'm placed.
Wow, awesome. All of you seem like you're really busy in a really good way, and especially during this crazy year that we've all had. It's really nice to have poetry to seek refuge in different ways. So Sunita, why don't you share with us how I don't it hasn't been too long since.
No, I was gonna say, we just wrapped up a few months ago, but I'm like feeling super inspired listening to the rest of you talk about everything you've done in the last few years, and I'm like, okay, I can do this, I can get there. So I'm trying to think. So one of the poems we worked on in the fall, I got accepted in my very first print publication. So I'd had several online acceptances, but this is my first like hold it in my hands, order copies, to send to my friends. So that was really exciting. And I've been, I've been writing. One of the things that was hard and was during our season, I had a miscarriage, and we had been struggling a lot, with secondary infertility. And I have finally hit a season where I feel like I'm ready to write about that. And I think some of that same like confidence building we talked about is really, I've finally started to work on that, and I've no idea where it will go. But some of the things you recommended to me during that time, I've been reading, and I'm just, I think I'm finding a lot of healing and growth out of this season. So we'll see. I hope that in a few years I have lots of cool things to report, like the rest of you did.
We all have life and our situations also that come into play. So the challenge of writing amidst all of that is a very real one, and especially like but whether it's marriage, whether it's family, whether it's work related, we all have been struggling with that. And then the past year, of course, where the world literally just shut down. In fact, when we met, Sunita and I met, it was in San Antonio at the AWP conference, and as soon as we, I think, landed home, at least for me, within 3 days we had lockdown here in California. So my last experience of AWP, was shared with you, Sunita.
I know my friends and I still refer to it as the last fun thing we did.
It was, yeah, the last conference, I mean,
Right.
for a long time, I mean, last physical conference. But no, it's, I just want to say thank you to all of you, because all of you have, enriched me as a poet, as a writer, as a teacher. Mentorship is something I'm so passionate about, because as a writer, and especially when I was studying poetry, I got that from different people, but I didn't have anybody that was from my own culture or who understood my cultural nuances. In fact, when I was at the University of Minnesota and I was workshopping my poems, I remember where most of the classmates, my peers, they were like, we don't know where this is coming from. And that shattered me, and I was like, I must be a really bad poet. And of course I was still learning. So, I mean, it's not whether you're a good or bad poet, but it's like, I think it's about making that connection. And I just felt like, I really doubted myself. But then, somehow I plodded along. And so I know what it feels like when you're unsure of, am I making that connection? And if I want to make that connection, how do I do it? So that's what keeps on pulling me back. And even after, and I did, I studied creative writing. I did my master's in 1999, 2000. And so it's now 21 years since then. And I still am meeting people who have the same issues I did. So we just have to keep on working towards it. And I feel like Writer to Writer is a wonderful platform to build community and to help alleviate some of the challenges we talked about. Yeah.
Yeah, Shikha, I wanted to ask, and I think I chime the thoughts of others on this call today. So we do understand that what inspired you to become a mentor, but why do it again and again?
You want to what? Hear it again.
Why do it over and over again? So like, what keeps you going? It's a huge time commitment. I know that all of us have other things that we are busy with. So you're taking away from something that you are expected to do or should be doing, and you are investing time in people that you practically don't really know. So what keeps you going? Like I believe you've done like 6 or 7 seasons already of the Writer to Writer program.
Yeah, I've done it 6 seasons, and honestly, I think it is about community, and it is about like I really wish someone had been there for me, and I know I can be there for someone. So why shouldn't I be? I just feel that it is, I am available. I'm there to do it. I don't know everything. I'm not like, I have not won a Pulitzer or Nobel or anything like that, but I feel I have knowledge which I want to share with others. And also that it's an exchange. And it just, every time I've done it has been such a wonderful experience that it always brings me back. And that's the truth, and I love this exchange of ideas. Even though I live in a place where it is culturally very diverse and there are a lot of South Asians, this area is tech dominated. I don't have many people that I can talk to about issues of poetry and literature and community. And I find community in mentorship. So that is the long and short of it, actually. And so I love doing it again and again and again for those reasons. And also to just, when you see that spark and you see that potential, which another writer has, and if you know that in some way you can help facilitate that going further, that compels me to do this. I mean, for me, it's almost like a no-brainer. And I don't know if I sound silly saying that, but it really is. I love seeing that spark become a flame. I know that's very corny, but that's the truth.
That's quite inspirational. Thanks for sharing. I hope like all of us can also give back in the same manner as you did someday.
I'm sure you have and will. I know, Manisha, you teach as well. So, but yeah, I really do believe in the idea of paying it forward. And I'm very hopeful that all of you have and will do that in different ways. So thank you so much. It's been fantastic. I feel like, we're all in the same room together, even though, it's virtual, but it's just amazing to see all of you together. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone who's watching and listening. And I hope those who are interested in the Writer to Writer program will visit AWP's website and take a look at the program and reach out to them, or even to me. I'm online. You can find me. I'm happy to answer any questions. And I'm sure all of you are as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.